So welcome to what I believe is our 12th annual State of the Village. Deb might remember, I think it was 2013, might have been our first. I am Rorden Hart, your village mayor. And in previous years, what we've done is we've had kind of a comprehensive slideshow PowerPoint presentation about all things village, whatever we might be working on. We're going to have a couple of slides today, but we wanted to try to get away from the overly college classroom type feel and have much more time. We have a couple people coming in, so I'll vamp a little. Leave a lot more time for open Q&A, kind of a town hall style feel. I know that there have been a number of issues in the last few months where there have been public meetings and public hearings, and we as a board, because we're in the thick of it every day, we sometimes, frankly, don't know what, you know the saying, you don't know what you don't know? We don't know what you all don't know. So for us to present something that we think is important may or may not be interesting to you. And there may be a lot of questions that you have that we just wouldn't think to address. So we want to leave a lot of time for that. Hopefully we can have some good engagement, good questions, really about anything village related, rather not wander off into topics of international politics. Let's try to keep it home centered if we possibly can. So what we're going to do is we're going to briefly touch on each department. The trustee, who is the de facto commissioner for that department, will be able to introduce themselves, touch on a few items. We will have a couple of things on screen for you to look at. And then I'll highlight some things that are important to the village in terms of projects and priorities for 2024. And then really at that point, we'll be able to open it up to really whatever you would like to discuss. I do want to acknowledge a couple of folks first before we begin. Jessica Giles and Jen Schlossberg, our front office mates, our clerk treasurer and deputy clerk treasurer, who keep the day-to-day machinations of the front office running, and they did the lion's share of the work to set up the facility for today. I also want to thank Chris Fox in the back, who helped this morning, and Joel Fay, where is Joel? Joel Fay, our EMS department chief, who was very helpful in setting things up this morning as well. And then I also wanted to acknowledge Keith Hannon. Trustee Hannon has been with us since 2018, has decided to retire from public life. I don't know about working life. You'll have to ask him about that later. And wanted to thank Keith for his years of service to the village. Wish him well in whatever public-facing activities he may decide to take on in the future, and acknowledge his service to the village.
Thank you.
And so without further ado, I'll hand it off to Keith as our police commissioner. He'll give us an update and an overview of how things have been going and projects and priorities with respect to the police department.
Thank you, Rorden. I'm mostly going to plan on spending my time offering public comment at meetings. So I'm looking forward to being on the other end of the microphone and giving you all a hard time about all the work you're not doing well enough. No, I'm just kidding. They all do a great job. I'm just going to hold this. So a little update on the police department. Kind of the number one priority right now, and has been, I'd say, for the last few years, is really cementing our staffing. As many of you know, if you kind of follow the public safety law enforcement industry, keeping officers at your department and recruiting new officers has not been easy the last few years. Historically, this department has survived off a roster of as high as 15 to 16 part-time officers who would come and do second or even a third shift at Trumansburg. We started to get away from that for obvious reasons. Officers on a second or third shift are not always at their best. They're tired. And you also, when you have a roster of 15, 16 officers, you don't get to know them as well. And so a few years ago, we hired 2 full-time officers to try to change all that. Well, that hasn't been easy to maintain either. We currently do have 2 full-time officers, but we have some retirements looming. And we just had our sergeant retire, Sergeant Peters, who was with the village for 12 years. So we have some holes to fill long term. And so that's kind of the chief's number one responsibility right now. One way we're trying to address that is by getting a little creative, by trying to come up with more of a hybrid position for a full-time officer and the sergeant. Historically, the sergeant has been more in the office only and would go out as needed or would help at events. But we're talking to some potential candidates who are on the younger side of their career, and this would be an opportunity for them to step into the sergeant role and be one of our full-time officers. So they would spend more time out on the road within the community, but also hold the rank of sergeant. So they'd get paid a little bit more, but the village saves a little bit of money by not having a sergeant and a full-time officer. So that's how we're trying to approach filling our sergeant position, but we probably will need one, maybe even two more full-time officers down the road. Chief is, we're all keeping a close eye on the South Street development, and we don't think that that's going to be a trouble spot just because it's being built. But anytime you add 100+ people in close proximity, you're by nature going to have more call volume. And so we're just kind of anticipating that. And again, trying to get out ahead and be proactive in our hiring. Not easy, but if you know people that are looking for a job in law enforcement in a wonderful, quaint village, we have a spot for them probably. So the next thing I would say is we're going to be investing in a couple more speed signs. You've probably seen those around the village. Applause. All right. Applause for speed signs. See the robots are taking our jobs already. We don't even need cars out there anymore. No, obviously there's a number of roads around the village that have had speed concerns. Some of you have come to the village board and addressed those. And we can only be so many places at once. It's hard to catch people in the act. However, we have found that the speed signs are effective at slowing people down. So we're going to deploy more speed signs in strategic areas, continue to measure the speeds. I won't be here, but someone's going to measure the, do the data analysis on those, but we do find they are effective. They've been in the school zone. You've probably seen them on Wig Street and Halsey Street and some other places around the village. So we're going to invest more in those. Chief also has a priority to add more traffic safety devices on Main Street. That continues to be a concern. Our hands are tied a little bit. It's a state route, requires a lot of collaboration. I'm putting that kindly with the State Department of Transportation, who doesn't always return our emails. But we're going to do whatever we can from the village perspective to continue to slow cars and trucks down on Main Street and make it easier to cross the streets, because some of those turns and crosswalks continue to be a little bit blind. And some good news is, Chief and I were just talking about this, we have seen, in his opinion, significant improvements in terms of less call volume to the Compass Trailer Park since it's become under new management. So that's good news that continues to improve. Both it's good for the village, it's good for the residents of that area. So that's some good news. Should I go into green space right now? Okay. So one of my other roles is to be the chair of our events and tourism committee. Really, I'll give most of the credit to Jessica Giles on that. She does everything, folks. You know that. However, I did want to, you may have heard some rumblings of what's happening over by the water tower. There are a number of green spaces around the village that are being examined to be turned into something. We don't know what yet, but that's where you all come in. So there's going to be a public feedback session at the library on March 6th. And the idea there will be for the green team that has been working on looking at these spaces and has done the preliminary work at the water tower. If you're not familiar with that, they've started work on installing pollinator gardens, and they've actually created a actual kind of parking lot now. And so the idea is that will become more of a usable park space. We don't know what's going to go kind of inside. That's part of this information session. So there's a few places that have been identified for potential areas of interest for utilizing the village green space. And so that will be at the library on Wednesday, March 6th at 6:30 p.m. So if you have ideas or you're just curious how that team is thinking about using the green space, that would be the place to go. And with that, I yield.
Thank you, Keith. And certainly if anyone has questions related to anything Keith or anyone that's about to speaks about, please don't hesitate to ask them when we get to the Q&A portion. I'm now going to turn to Marcia Horn, Trustee Horn, who oversees our fire department.
Good morning, everybody. Matt Taylor is our chief, and we have spent the majority of the year trying to shore up a lot of the equipment. There were 278 calls for the year, 81 to the village, and they had 11 reported working fires, 26 motor vehicle accidents, and 35 calls for service like wires, trees, gas odors. Maybe this spring somebody might need their basement pumped out, which is a very common thing. But we are very, very lucky to have such a dedicated group of volunteers. We currently have 47 active volunteers in our fire company, and that says a lot for a small village of this size. There are other villages that are having to basically get rid of their departments because they don't have enough people to man them. And we're just very lucky. And I just wanted to accentuate the fact that their training hours on top of their call hours was they had 2,600 in-service hours. In other words, the hours that they were on call or going to a fire or motor vehicle accident. And they had 3,500 hours. So that runs at about 6,100 hours. And if you had to pay for that, I would say modestly, if it was $100 an hour for all of that crew, they saved the village about $610,000 a year just by their volunteerism. So they put in a ton of work. They pay for all their own training. As you could say, the department is what the village owns, and that's all of the equipment and the buildings and everything. And the company is the volunteers and the people that do the work. And when they raise money, they're raising money for equipment or extra training that they want, any donations that come in from people that have felt very thankful for their presence. So they have really upped the rope rescue team. There's been a lot of calls, upticks to calls to the gorges that they wanted to increase their rapid water rescue, and they wanted to increase their training on rappelling into the gorge. Last year, they had 2 hikers stranded in the gorge about 30 feet up the embankment, and it was hard for them to get cell service. So when they tell people, please do not hike when you're not supposed to, that's why. And they had a hard time calling 911 because the cell service didn't work. So they're increasing that. And I just want to, I'm just so proud of them and how dedicated they are. And as you're all familiar, the Christmas giveaway that they do every year with the toys and going around the village in the fire truck, that's always a wonderful program. And if you do want to donate money for that, and people have asked if they could participate in some way, even though it's a very well-oiled machine right now, they always can use funds for that. And you would need to write your check to the Trumansburg Fire Company. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate them and enjoy so much working with this group of individuals, and they really love and care for our community, and how fortunate we are to have them all involved. So.
Thanks, Marcia. We'll have a couple more comments on fire a little later on, but we'll turn now to all things DPW.
Give me a second while I'm running AV and presenting. Actually, I was gonna do, no, yeah, if anyone comes in, just admit them. Actually, I'm gonna start with, CPZR and, so that's the comprehensive plan and zoning a bit. I wasn't gonna do slides. I was actually advocating not to do slides. And then I asked the DPW, how they would categorize, their year and what they've been up to. And I got amazing, beautiful slides back from them. So then now I'm doing slides and I added a couple more for, comp plan and zoning, but I hope to keep them just pictures and I'll just talk to them briefly. But looking back at the past year for the comprehensive plan and zoning committee, two big efforts that happened last year. One, which hopefully everyone is familiar with, the residential zoning revision that the committee had been working on for about 2 years, maybe more, had gone through like 5 different drafts, multiple information sessions and so forth, came before this board and was eventually passed at the end of last year. The big changes there were primarily focused on the lot dimensions. So how big of a lot you need for how many houses or units on a lot. And the focus there was to address the affordability concerns that we're hearing so much about in the community and in the county, being able to allow people to build slightly more dense housing on smaller lots. Both allows a couple more lots in the village to be built upon, also allows people to have maybe a second dwelling on the lot that they could rent out or have someone else live in. So that was a large part of the focus. There are other pieces that came along with. There was removed a bunch of manufactured housing regulations that were now in conflict with New York state law, which was passed between the previous zoning and the current revision. So we had to update to reflect the New York state law changes. We did update the affordable housing incentives to expand it into even lower income households. So really trying to provide benefits when there's affordable housing being built, primarily that has funding from state or federal aid to create truly affordable housing that's tied to your income level and actually is insured to be affordable for you, whatever income they're targeting for. And then there was obviously a number of concerns when you start talking about density and smaller lots around stormwater issues and neighborhood character. And so we heard a lot about that, consider those impacts deeply and added language to try and address and mitigate some of those impacts. The other key piece that the committee was then working on, so while the village board was doing most of the thinking on the passing is the residential piece, the committee was thinking about short-term rentals, which is another issue that comes up quite a bit in the community. The committee went as far as to draft a law, have a feedback session on that, and kind of through that conversation, through that feedback and future conversations that the committee had, the decision was to move forward with regulating short-term rentals through building code to start. And so there are a number of places where building code can impact short-term rentals that primarily impacts mixed-use buildings and buildings with 3 or more dwellings in them. So like larger apartment buildings, though 3 is not particularly large, would have to work with more restrictive building code requirements. And the expectation is that's probably that's not understood widely in the community, and probably isn't being, those standards aren't being enforced and people aren't working up to those standards in most places. So a letter has gone out to people that we anticipate could be impacted by that. And we'll see how much that impacts the short-term rentals in the community. We do have good data reporting through the county on how many short-term rentals there are in the community. And so the intention is to see how that works, give it some time for that to happen, look at the data and see if we're at a place where the committee and the board feels comfortable with the amount of short-term rentals in the community, recognizing that we don't want to get necessarily to 0, but we also don't want to have hundreds, right? We want to find this middle ground and not add more regulation than we need, but make sure we're addressing it and keeping an eye on it. So more to come there as those changes are put out in the community and people are understanding them, and we see how owners react to those things. This year, looking forward, the committee is primarily focused on mixed use zoning. So that is currently the kind of downtown core in the village. The current zoning is from 227 to South Street in that section. And then the committee is also kind of considering potentially broadening that, recognizing that much of Main Street is some sort of mixed use. We have schools, we have B&Bs, we have churches all along up and down Main Street. We have this building. There's a lot that is not your typical residential neighborhood along Main Street. And so trying to understand how can we best manage that and have zoning that reflects that diversity of types and uses that we have across Main Street without turning, while still respecting who's there in a residential use and making the best use of that space. So very early conversations. Currently still talking mostly about that downtown core, but going to start broadening that conversation and see where it takes us. And obviously, as there was with the last round, there'll be plenty of public comment, lots of opportunities for revision and iteration on that plan as we go forward with that. So then I'll jump to DPW and water and sewer. So last year, some of the areas, like I mentioned, I asked the DPW what was some of the highlights of last year. A couple of the ones here, I'll go through, 5 or 6 of them. The Union Street sidewalk, I think everyone's hopefully seen the stretch up to the conservatory. That was an incredible effort there, both reworking the sidewalk itself, regrading it to make it easier to go up and down with strollers and wheelchairs and so forth, and just walking, honestly. Yeah, it's really wonderful. The drainage there needed to be redone, so that's been dealt with, and they were able to secure a number of donation of a bunch of granite. Was it granite? Is that right? Yep. To both put in the retaining wall there and the sidewalk and the stairs up to the conservatory. So that's been a wonderful addition, and also plays into the conservatory's efforts that they're going through to revamp that building. This was a donation in kind from the village to help match some of their grant funding that they're going after. DPW is always on board for water breaks, water main breaks. Thankfully, we only had 2 this past year, but they were involved in addressing both of those. One of them was fairly substantial and required replacing a large section of pipe rather than just kind of, patching a break. But that is work that continues to go on, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that plays into some other pieces as we go. There was the salt shed that the DPW has for all the salt over the winter needed repair. There was a number of posts that were falling apart in that shed. We did talk about replacing the whole thing to a rather substantial dollar amount. And the DPW thankfully was able to make those repairs in-house, address the issues. And you could see in the bottom picture here, the nice new looking salt shed inside. And that saved, considerable money for the village, and deeply appreciated that DPW has the skills and the capability of doing that. I think they said it was $6,000 total at the end of it, and took 3 weeks rather than being a much more substantial program. The pollinator garden, as Keith mentioned, looking for more input on what that looks like up at the water tower. But the DPW has already been up there working in the new parking space that people might have seen, as well as helping find materials for pollinator gardens and so on and so forth. So they've been a large help in that effort as well. And then the final parts for last year, looking back, the DPW started relining sewer holes. So this seems very, why do we care? But this is actually incredibly important. We have, sewer holes all over the village, and quite a number of them are in a pretty sad state. The issue there is that when it rains, stormwater can come in here, and then sometimes it's not just a trickle, it's a full torrent that comes into these sewer holes. That eventually impacts the sewer plant itself. We're only regulated to go a certain amount of gallons per minute through the sewer plant, and if we get a large storm event, it all goes in sewer holes, all goes to the sewer plant. Then we go over that number. The state starts knocking on our door and asking a lot of questions. So this is an opportunity to replace those. There's a new product available. It's kind of like a spray foam application, and allows us to rehab those sewer holes at a much lower cost than pulling the whole thing out and replacing the whole thing. And so we're testing that out this year. We did 2, I think, holes, and the DPW is happy with that, the way it works, the kind of outcomes. And so we're going to continue doing that on an annual basis, picking a handful of these every year. We have an itemized list starting from the worst offenders, and we'll work our way down to start addressing more of that inflow into the sewer plant. And then finally, the GIS mapping. So I think folks probably saw the blue flags all around the village over the past year. That was flagging all of the water shutoff valves for everybody's house. And then we had our engineering team go around and map those with GPS. You know, they've got a better one than what's in your phone, but it's still the same technology. And we're making a digital map of all of those, all of those shutoff valves, and then continue to build on that. All of the water mains, all of the sewer mains, we will continue to kind of invest in this, all of those sewer holes, tagging all of those so that we have not only a digital map that now when there's a water main break, the DPW can just pull up on their phone, okay, here's where we need to go to turn off the sewer, the water mains. But it allows us to track information about all these. When was the last time we exercised this, turn it on and off, checked it still, you know, we can still turn that valve one way or another. We can keep track of all the sewer holes that we're relining. When was that done? You know, all that kind of information can now be stored in this database that's also a map, and that helps really modernize how the DPW is working. Currently, we have basically 3x5 cards in a drawer that is all this information, and the DPW has to run back and check where the water main shutoff is and come back, and it's quite a mess. So we're really taking a step forward. And so looking forward, I'll mention two other places, again, where this is going to come in handy. The water valve replacement issue. So we do have, during the water main break in November on South Street, we noticed a couple of valves weren't functioning, and so had to go turn off even more valves further away to turn off all the water in that area to be able to address the water main break. And this causes the water main breaks to last longer, to impact more people because more people have their water shut off. It's not a great place to be in. So using that map, that new GIS map we have, we can start tracking which ones have we exercised recently, which ones are in good form, which are not. And so starting this year, we're going to be looking to replace, ideally on an annual basis, some of those water valve replacements. And that will allow us to turn off the water more quickly and impact a smaller radius of folks as we have water main breaks and other sorts of maintenance that needs to happen on the system. So that's great. And that's, again, something we can track in that GIS map. The other one is the service line inventory. So this is something that homeowners own the service line from their house to the water main. Potentially, those lines could have lead, they could have galvanized steel, some of these things that are either not great at all. Lead and galvanized steel is an issue you'd want to address, though not to the level of lead, I don't think. But the state and the federal government is requiring us as the water system owners to create an inventory of all these service lines so that we can notify homeowners, hey, either we know you have lead in your line, which I don't think we're aware of any at this point, but if there was a community that had that, they would have to alert those, or we don't know that you don't, right? So we're not sure either which way. And we're going to be building out that inventory over the course of this year, and that will be public, and that will be, we'll then have to alert homeowners who we don't have enough information one way or another to let you know what's in your service line. But this is a way that the federal government is trying, I'm assuming here, I haven't dug super deep into this details, but my assumption is the federal government trying to help remediate lead in people's homes. And the way that they can do that is by kind of, creating a requirement for the local water system owners to help homeowners understand what they might or might not have in their service lines. So that was a long whirlwind tour, but that's DPW, water and sewer, CPZR.
I was just going to say, Ben does incredible work. I've had a pleasure of being here for 6 years next to him, as does our two DPW leaders are here today. And those three, everything you saw here just touches a little bit on what they do. And they've done it basically all year with a skeleton crew, if I'm not mistaken. They've had only 3 people at most on their crew all year, with Ben trying to help them along the way. So they've done all this work with, 60% of their staff. So, thank them for all of their extra hours and work.
That's a good thing to point out. We are currently hiring. So if you know people who are interested in DBW, let us know.
Thanks, Ben. And I'll turn now to the other Ben. We do have two Bens on the board for all things EMS.
Yeah, so I want to start in sort of an awkward way, and I apologize for that. But when I look around the room, I noticeably don't see Janice and Jack. And I just wanted to acknowledge them. If you're out there listening, we're thinking of you. We love you. They have been, for the last 10 years, my time on the board, they have been stalwarts of these meetings, of all of our meetings. We complain regularly that no one attends our budget meetings. They are the ones who come. They are the ones who sign up for the committees that no one wants to do. I think traditionally, it has been Jack's role to disagree with most and not everything of what we've done. And still, I've never felt more comfortable or at home around another person. I mean, it's just, so I just wanted to mention that. We're thinking of you. I said it was an awkward way to start. Now I have to transition into just the regular updates. So I'm actually not going to start with EMS. I'm going to start with our street tree committee. As many of you hopefully know, for the last 4 or 5 years, we have done a tree risk mitigation program where we've tried to catalyze and provide financial incentives for people who own dangerous trees within the village of right-of-way to mitigate that risk, to either take down those trees or to do critical pruning that helps prevent damage or injury in our village rights-of-way. It's actually kind of an awkward time to talk about this too, because the last couple storms, we've had fairly large trees come down all over the village. Unfortunately, all of those trees are trees that are outside of the village right-of-way falling into it. So those are outside the purview of what we're doing. So I would just take a moment to encourage all of you to look at your trees carefully, think those things through. For our sake, for the trees that are in the village right-of-way, we will be continuing that program. This year, we're going to switch it up a little bit. We'll be releasing applications in May. Those applications will be due in July. We will then review them and again provide sort of small, hopefully catalytic financial incentives to reduce that risk. The other piece that'll change this year is we'll also be adding small financial incentives for planting. So if you are looking to have new trees, we can help you review that. And again, the applications will go out in May, we do in July, and then hopefully we'll have a sort of fall planting season in the village, and that will be very exciting. I also want to briefly note that this is our 5th year as a tree city. So this is a designation that we get from the Arbor Day Foundation, and 5 years feels important enough to mention. So that's good. I also wanted to talk briefly about our youth programming in the town and village. This is programming that we partner with the town of Ulysses on. The last couple of years, we have transitioned away from housing those programs within the village and have moved them into the town, basically to match administrative capacities, right? So they have a very strong administrative core for sort of social recreational programming already built into the way the town works. Moving our recreation programs into the town has been exceptional. It happened right before COVID started and allowed for this really dynamic response to COVID that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So I'm immensely grateful to the town for that. More recently, we've also transitioned away from working with Cornell Cooperative Extension. So we used to run what's called a program manager position through Cornell Cooperative Extension. That is now also housed within the town. It has been just an incredible opportunity to sort of expand the programs that we provide. These are programs that we provide in the high school and middle school, primarily social, but also somewhat, a small focus, I would say, in recreation, but again, primarily social programs that are really designed to provide an outlet and an opportunity to engage with students that might not otherwise engage in traditional recreation programming or musical programming or things that are offered by the school. So this is essential programming. In my mind, I took advantage of it certainly when I was a troubled youth myself. It was essential for me. But I'm really excited, and I wanted to call out particularly the town. Caitlin in particular, Caitlin Olson, the town supervisor, has been instrumental in getting these programs up and running and making sure that they're sort of doing the things that we need and want them to do. So that is really very incredible. We don't need applause breaks every time, guys. There's more coming. Another one that I wanted to briefly mention is the village was recently awarded grants through the DEC ZEV program, which is Zero Energy Vehicle Program. So we will be installing 2 fast chargers in the coming years in the village. We will be the first publicly accessible fast chargers available in the sort of between the lakes corridor. So we're really excited about the ways that not only opens things up for the people who live here, right, and may have electric vehicles, but also people that may get sort of pulled in, maybe take the scenic route on the way north, right, or the way south. So that is really exciting. I wanted to thank a couple people on that one because this is incredible work that was really started in a kind of bizarre pattern by Roxanne Marino and Rick Darfler, who were part of the library board at the time, and they sort of got this ball rolling. So I wanted to say thank you to them. I don't think they're here, but maybe they'll see it.
Rick's online.
Hey, thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
They were really instrumental and essential. They really started the whole piece. So we transitioned at a certain point from thinking about housing those facilities at the library. As we did that, it really became a village program, but without them, we wouldn't have started in the first place. So thank you again to Rick and Roxanne. And now I will get to EMS. So our EMS department, as many of you know, Chris Fox is in the back, Joel Fay right there. These guys are the people who respond primarily when you call 911. We talk about them, I think, every year at this meeting where we say, what kind of trouble are we getting ourselves into from a policy programmatic point of view in terms of our regional role? I'm going to sort of defer that conversation to Rorden in just a few minutes. And I just wanted to highlight some of the more concrete changes and accomplishments that they've made this last year. So the first big one that I'm very excited about is the addition of a fly car. You may have seen this. This has been sort of an ongoing difficulty, or rather the fly car solves an ongoing difficulty that we've had, which is primarily, lakeside driveways that we couldn't get down, things like that, where we need a 4-wheel drive vehicle. And so this serves that role. Deb will remember these conversations from years ago. It also allows our crews, someone coming in for a second call, to respond as near as possible to immediately. So this is really an immense advantage for all of you. If you are ever in a medical emergency, which hopefully you are not, this will really provide an essential component for our response. We also this last year were recognized as a training center. So we're now a nationally recognized training center. This allows our EMS crew to teach CPR classes, to teach wilderness first aid, babysitting, to do all of these things that I think we're hoping to provide to the community and really, again, catalyze sort of important improvements within our community. One of those, and I'm actually going to turn this over, Joel, if you don't mind, will be offering community CPR. This is one of the easiest ways that we can decrease mortality rates in a community. But Joel, do you mind saying just a couple words since you're here about the CPR? This was not planned, so thanks, Joel.
So one of the things that we've been looking at is how we can increase our survival rates for cardiac arrests. Right now, amongst the entire state, the chance of surviving a cardiac arrest outside of a hospital is less than 1%. When somebody drops into cardiac arrest, they have about 10 minutes of oxygen in their body. But if CPR isn't being done, that oxygen is not being circulated, so brain death occurs quickly. If I can get, in theory, 100% of our community trained in CPR, we can get that survival rate above 60%. People can have cardiac arrest and have a very good chance of survival. There is no way that us as a medical organization can increase that number. We can only get to houses and scenes as quick as we possibly can. This is an area we truly need the community's help to increase survivability of it. So what we're doing, we're offering 2 forms of classes. One is to become certified in CPR. That's about a 2.5, 3-hour class. But we're also going to offer courses in-house that are 30 minutes long. They're community CPR. They're free. Stop in for a cup of coffee and learn how to do CPR. We're really aiming to try to get this project launched, not just in the village, but also in all of our local townships as well to try to help increase the survivability of cardiac arrests.
So that one definitely deserved an applause break. Thank you, Joel. So one last thing to celebrate, I think, for our EMS department is, excuse me, we were recently certified as the region's first rapid sequence intubation program. So this is an RSI program. Essentially, this allows our paramedics who have been trained, and again, the training is extensive to operate this program, but our paramedics can basically act kind of as mobile, and I'm going to screw up this word, anesthesiologists. Yeah, did I get it? And that, again, the focus here you can see is increasing survivability. So that allows, if we have a stroke victim or various critical conditions. And again, I should have let Joel just keep talking, but it increases drastically the survivability in conditions like that, right? So we can transport then to regional critical care facilities rather than going directly to CMC and then having them transport to a different facility. So that is, again, another incredibly impressive way that the EMS department has been increasing, hopefully, our the rate at which we survive as a community. And I hope we all celebrate that. That said, I did mention that regionally, our EMS department takes on a more and more critical role. And I want to just briefly mention that our calls for the year exceeded 1,000 in a year. This is increasingly common. We've had some turbulence in terms of total call volumes because of COVID. But we were once again above 1,000. So we were 1,035 calls in 2003. And that, I believe, will be the segue to Roy.
Thanks, Ben. EMS is one of those conversations that's frankly not very well understood. And I think it's important for village residents, without boring you. I think it's important for village residents to understand it as well as you're willing. All of our departments do a fantastic job for the village, but only EMS and fire really have a regional impact. Police certainly does in the sense that we offer mutual aid support to the sheriff's department outside of village boundaries if and when, but that fortunately is not something that's increasing. One or two times a month in general will we need to have our police officers operate outside the village. The fire department, of course, you all know, has a 56 square mile coverage area via contracts with the towns of Ulysses, Covert, and Hector. But fortunately, that area is not growing either, at least not yet, and we hope that it doesn't have to. Volunteer fire companies in the area adjacent to us are able to maintain, at least currently, they're able to maintain adequate staffing. So unless there's a major emergency, a major fire, our fire department is largely able to stay within its boundaries of the fire protection district, and almost never does our fire department have to assist the town or city of Ithaca. EMS, on the other hand, is a completely different animal. We have, as Ben has discussed, we have a fantastic EMS agency, well-trained staff, excellent leadership, improvements in the level of service that we can offer, and that is not common. What we're actually seeing is that because of that capacity, we are, through a complex system of what's called automatic mutual aid, where basically if an adjacent agency cannot respond to a call, New York State Department of Health requires us to take that call if we're available. So a frustration that has been expressed on our board from time to time is, why can't we say no to some of these faraway calls? And the answer is no, we can't. And so this next slide really kind of illustrates where Trumansburg EMS, or what Trumansburg EMS has become. Each of those kind of, hopefully you can see that, each of those geolocation pins is a call that Trumansburg EMS responded to in calendar 2023. If you can see the kind of the black outline, that's the district that the EMS is designed to cover. It's 112 square miles. So we have contracts with the towns of Ulysses, Covert, and Hector. to cover those areas. They pay us for that service. That helps to offset our departmental costs. But everything outside of that black line are mutual aid calls that were actually responded to by this department. So all the way north of Romulus, those transports could result in a patient being taken to Rochester or Syracuse. So our ambulance is potentially out of service for several hours. Yes, that pin in North Lansing is accurate. And there were dozens of calls into the town and city of Ithaca. The reason why I mention this and why it's relevant to village residents is when Ben mentioned we don't have anyone show up to our budget meetings. We've had 3 and no one's showed up yet. Actually, Dolores showed up.
Yes.
Dolores showed up to 1. Thank you, Dolores. But if you are ever interested in kind of how our village budget operates, we, outside of water and sewer, our annual village budget is about $3 million. A little over 45% of that is the EMS department. So about $1.4 million of the $3 million is EMS. Again, we do recoup some of that expense from the towns with which we contract. But these roughly 15 to 20% of calls that are outside of that district, no one's paying us for that except through billing if there's the ability to recoup some costs from the health insurance company of the person that transport is provided to. There is a process or there's a project in place. You may hear about it. If you do hear about it, I would encourage you to advocate for it. Ann Corman, I don't believe, is here. Maybe she's online, our county legislator for our area. She is very supportive of this program that is launched this year through Tompkins County. Tompkins County is launching what they are calling a rapid medical response program. Joel Fay is on the steering committee for that program. It is an EMT only, so not paramedics, not ambulances. It is an EMT only program, which is designed to take some of the non-medical emergency calls. So again, I don't want to get too far out into the weeds on this, but when you call 911, the dispatcher is trained to assess the situation as best they can, given the information that the person on the phone may or may not be providing them, which may or may not be accurate. They have to assess whether this is an urgent medical call or something like a slip and fall where someone needs help to get up. When rescue departments, fire departments, and others are not able to respond to the less urgent non-medical calls, an ambulance will be dispatched by state law to help that person, even if it's not a medical emergency. And so where you see those pins of Trumansburg EMS responding to more and more calls to the south, it's because the entire network of EMS in the region is being pulled and stressed by who can respond to which calls in a timely manner. So the county is launching a program that will hopefully, I believe it will, have a positive impact on all of this by virtue of the fact that there will now be another agency to respond to the less urgent non-medical calls so that the ambulance agencies can, for lack of a better phrase, stay home more often. It's not a cheap program. It's about $700,000 or $800,000 a year in year one. It's something that the county is debating as to how to pay for it. There has been a suggestion that certain municipalities should pay into the program. My contention to the county is that this should be a county-run operation, just like the sheriff's department. If you don't have a police department, the sheriff's department responds. If you do have a police department, the sheriff's department can offer backup. That concept is what I'm hoping this county program will become. There's one more EMS map just to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is all of the EMS calls in 2023 countywide by all agencies. So the dark blue is Bangs Ambulance. They take about 11,000 calls a year. The red is Dryden Ambulance. The green is Groton EMS. And the yellow is that yellow? Gold. Kind of a goldish, greenish, yellowish color. That's Trumansburg EMS. So where you see those blue dots stretching to the south, that is Bangs Ambulance taking calls further and further south due to the lack of availability of other agencies to take certain non-medical emergency calls. As Bangs is stretched to the south, other agencies, primarily Dryden and Trumansburg, will have to pick up the slack during busy times, and that's how we get pulled to the south. So it's a complex, interconnected regional network. If we were building an EMS system in central New York from scratch and money was no object, we would not set it up this way. Not at all. But it's what has evolved over time. It's what we have to work with. And starting from scratch is not an option, either from a financial standpoint or from a patient care standpoint. So anything that can be done to help shore all of this up will be helpful from the county. And again, the reason to kind of give this primer is so that you understand when we talk about budgets, the village of Trumansburg doesn't have any pork in its budget. Everything is department related. And this is by far and away our biggest department and our most, I believe, our most important department from a regional standpoint, with the service that's offered to the greater region, particularly in between Cayuga and Seneca Lake. If Trumansburg EMS closed its doors tomorrow, there would be no one else to pick up these calls. They would go unanswered, or your wait times would increase from 5 to 8 minutes to 45 minutes. And that's, to me, that's unacceptable. So thank you to Joel. Thank you to the department. Thank you for all the work you do in managing what is a portion of the healthcare system that is growing at a rate much faster than anything else. So thank you. Touch very briefly on a number of projects before I make a comment on our budget. I tend to be an old school yellow pad note taker. So I have a list, if anybody ever wants to see it, which is 4 or 5 pages long at this point, of various projects the village has worked on. Some of them have been completed. Some of them are in process, and some of them are kind of wish list items. But the big ones that I wanted to just touch on, some of which have been mentioned, we've had a significant, or we're in the process of a significant IT infrastructure overhaul for the village.
Yeah,
Thank you.
long time coming.
Thank you to Jessica and Jennifer again for all your work on that in the front office. The state comptroller is paying a lot closer attention to things like IT security and so forth. So we've made some things you will not see, but some significant changes for the better. I want to give a very brief update on Camp Barton. I know that there's been a lot of community interest in that over the last couple of years. For those of you either in person or online, or who watch this later who may not be familiar, the Baden-Powell Council of the Boy Scouts in 2021 announced their intention to sell Camp Barton and approached the village of Trumansburg and the town of Ulysses and asked whether we wanted to buy it. Their target price was somewhere in the $5 million range, and we said, well, wouldn't that be nice? Shortly thereafter, though, a big thank you to Assemblymember Kellis. I think most of you know Anna is a Trumansburg native. I had a conversation with her. She had recently been instrumental in saving the Bell Station property across the lake, which NYSEG was selling. It's become a DEC property, trying to keep it, preserve it as a forever wild piece of land. So Anna reached out to her contacts in the governor's office, as well as the Office of New York State Parks. And what began was a 2-year process, which we're coming to the end of finally, whereby the Office of New York State Parks, Recreation and Historical Preservation will purchase the Camp Barton property. It will become a state park. And the municipalities of the village of Trumansburg, the town of Covert, and town of Ulysses will manage the park. We expect that process to close possibly this month, possibly in March. So we're definitely nearing the finish line. Everyone who's needed to sign off on it has signed off on it. The Attorney General, the Governor's Office, the Comptroller, everyone's on board. It's just a matter, if anyone's bought real estate recently, of setting that closing date. We're waiting for the closing date. And I would expect, as has been the goal from the beginning, we want to ramp up into this. We don't in any way, shape, or form expect that it will be a fully functional, fully open state park this summer. We want to preserve the property. We want it to be open to the public. And of course, New York State has their rules and regulations about how a state park must be operated. But we want to take a 3 to 5 year approach so that we can make sure it's done right, make sure it's operated the way we would all want to see a local state park operated. And really, the sky is the limit with respect to what we can do there, but it is a smaller piece of property relative to Deganic Falls State Park. So we want to just make sure that operationally it's done right with as few hiccups as possible. So stay tuned on that, but that is coming to the purchase part of the project is coming to a conclusion soon. The other project that I talk about every single year is our needs for a new fire and EMS building. The building we sit in was retrofitted to be what it is now back in the early 80s, I believe. Marcia mentioned we have 47 volunteer fire company members. I believe 39 of them are interior rated firefighters. So we have a well-trained, robust, and I always throw in young, and that is not meant to be an ageist comment at all, except that most of the fire companies around New York State have not only a volunteerism problem, they also have a capability problem that frankly comes with an aging population. So if the fact that 39 of 47 are interior rated, these are the people running into a burning building. These are the people who are cutting you out of a car. They're well-trained and we appreciate their work, as Marcia mentioned, but the facilities in which we sit for their needs and for the needs of our EMS department are still, frankly, from the 1980s. We need modern 21st century facilities. We need proper hazmat decontamination facilities. We need proper sleeping quarters for our 24-hour EMS crew. Lots of things that we are making do with, but need better. We need better for them. We have Congressman Molinaro has included us in his congressional appropriation package for $3.5 million to go towards the construction of a new fire hall. However, as you know, if you watch the news, Congress hasn't passed a budget in quite some time. So what we had hoped would be included in a September budget last year, well, now it's March of the following year, and they're still no closer to a budget from my guess or from my read. So my guess is that it's still a hope, but not something we can count on. We also did apply, the village did apply for a New York State grant. Governor Hochul has made some money available to volunteer fire companies. The maximum dollar amount that we can apply for is 1.5 million, which we did apply for. That has to be used only on the volunteer fire side, but it's certainly a big enough number to make an impact in what we're trying to do. Long term, if we're able to secure, our engineers estimate anywhere between $6.5 and $8 million to build a new modern facility. If we're able to secure that, we would certainly move forward with it. What I've begun to think about in the last several months, watching what happens in DC, is we may need a backup plan. And that backup plan, fortunately or unfortunately, may be to revisit something we discussed at this meeting in 2016, which was massively retrofitting this building. We did have plans put together for that. The price tag came in at 1.5 million in 2016, and overwhelmingly and resoundingly, the chorus of responses from the attendees that day was, that's too much. Post-pandemic, and based on the maps that we just saw of our EMS department, I think $1.5 million would be a bargain. Unfortunately, we're 8 years along, so that's probably more like 2.5. But if we're able to secure some grant funding, that's not enough for the ideal, then I think we may need, as a village, to begin looking at what can we do. I think it was JFK that said, do what you can with what you have where you are. If we're able to secure $1 million, $2 million-ish somewhere along the line, and we don't think we can get to 8, then you will start reading about the village board's plans to spend a lot of money retrofitting the fire station, and hopefully the response will be more welcoming this time around, with the backdrop of the regional responsibilities that both departments have. Ben mentioned our the ZEV grant we received from DEC, lots of initials. The grant was for, I believe, was 187,000-ish. $187,000 for installation of chargers. I believe by the math at the time, based on construction costs at the time, we were about $150,000 to $160,000 short of the rapid chargers, the 30-minute chargers. So we were going to install what we could install with 187,000. I reached out again, thank you to her again, to Assemblymember Kellis, told her we were awarded the ZEV grant. We would really love to have rapid chargers on State Route 96 in the heart of the wine country. Could she help? And she did. So we were awarded last week an additional $150,000 through her office, which will allow for us to be able to install the rapid chargers as we move forward on that. You may read a headline or two from time to time going forward about Senator Gillibrand's efforts to designate the Finger Lakes as a national heritage area. It looks like that may be successful. It's gotten through all of the reviews that the National Park Service have to do. I think it's probably also being held up by the budget process in DC. But should that occur, that will essentially designate the Finger Lakes the same way areas like Mount Rushmore and other famous landmark areas are designated, where there's federal grant funding available for all sorts of needs and uses in the area, primarily focused on tourism and natural preservation of natural areas in that region. We also applied for I think it was $1.8 million. I'm blanking on the dollar amount for sidewalks on West Main Street. So that application has gone in. We will know probably by mid to late summer whether that's awarded or not. It is a federal grant process, similar to the grant that paid for the Main Street project back in 2006. So if successful, we will be able to install sidewalks from the farmers market to Seneca Road, down Seneca Road to Compass, and across Seneca Road in the town of Covert. We'll have to work with them from the intersection of Route 96 and Seneca Road to the First Baptist Church. So we would include the Legion, the doctor's office, essentially create walkability from Compass and what is the northeast corner of that intersection all the way into the heart of the village. So fingers crossed that we are able to get that grant application. And then last but not least, Ben Darfler mentioned water mains and the water projects. Not every year. Occasionally we get asked questions about replacing our water mains. And we are going to begin looking at grant funding for larger scale replacements of our water mains. There are about 12 miles of water mains underneath the village of Trumansburg. At current prices, it would cost about $12 million to replace it. Hate to have the guys crawling into a cold, dark hole in the middle of January. But when you factor in overtime and parts, it's about $1,500 to $2,000 per water main break. So if you do the math, the return on investment is something like several hundred years if we were to borrow to replace all the water mains. However, the federal government and New York State are making more and more money available for those projects because so much infrastructure in New York State is aging, some of which is over 100 years old in some parts of the state. Ours is not that old, fortunately. But as those funds become available, you will hear more about larger scale replacement projects for things like that. Last but not least, a comment on our budget cycle. This is my 17th budget. And I make that comment only to say that I've seen this process, and it is unfortunate that more people don't come to our budget meetings, but I get it. It's boring. What I've seen is that, and I don't say this because I've been involved. I say this because I've seen how other municipalities operate. I see what larger municipal budgets look like. I'm the chair of our county health consortium. We have a $70 million budget. I know what budgets look like, and I truly believe that this board and the department commissioners and the department heads do a fantastic job every year of managing cost increases. There is, as I mentioned before, there is no pork. They are doing everything within their power to run their departments as leanly as is humanly possible. And yet things get more expensive. The next slide is something I showed a year or two ago, and it just shows how we attempt, and I know there's a lot of numbers on this page, but how we attempt to manage growth of two things. Number one, growth of costs to administer a department. Number two, growth in our assessments. And I know that everyone is freshly wounded by the assessments that you opened in the last week. And the two things that or the three things that I would have you focus on when it comes to village spending, I'm not going to speak to any other municipality, is that we have maintained a flat village tax rate for 5 years. That is largely due to the fact that assessments continue to go up. But again, it speaks to the management of the department heads and the commissioners who oversee the departments to try as best we can to keep things as manageable as possible from an expense perspective for our residents. So a flat tax rate for 5 years, I am not promising that it will be flat again this year, but we certainly will do what we can. The second thing I would have you look at is the assessment percentage change, which is the 3.16 at the bottom. Going back to 2011, the average growth, I know it hurts when you open the envelope and assessments are a lot higher, but the average rate of growth over the last, not including the assessments you just opened, by the way, I'll touch on that in a second. The average rate of growth of your property values is 3.1% per year. That is about the post-World War II rate of inflation. So I don't know that it's the largest asset you own anymore, given what retirement accounts are doing, but one of your largest possessions is growing at a normalized or a normal rate. What is not keeping pace with that is the last number to the right, which is our tax levy. The tax levy, very simply, is all of our revenue versus all of our expenses as a village. And the difference is what we have to charge in property taxes. That has grown at an average rate of 5% per year. And that simply speaks to payroll and healthcare. Health insurance goes up at a rate much higher than that. The fact that we're a member of a health consortium that allows us to keep our health insurance premium increases between 5 and 8% is great. Other municipalities this year, 2024, other municipalities saw health insurance increases as high as 16%. The fact that we're able to stay between 5 and 8 is wonderful, but it's still between 5 and 8 relative to other things. So that's what we in budget season are constantly, that's the constant tug of war. If we have pork, if we have departments that we feel that we don't need, this would be a different conversation. But because all of our departments play such an essential role, not only for village residents, but regionally, we have to manage this relationship as best we can. One note I'll make on the love letter from Tompkins County Assessment that we all got this week. Those assessments don't take effect until July, so they don't affect the village budget cycle we're in now. Our village budget begins June 1. So at the bottom of the village-wide total assessment, that 170 million, that's last July's total assessment for the village. That's the number we have to use to generate revenue and calculate our tax rate for the budget year that we're in, which takes effect June. All of those assessments you saw go up in those letters will take effect in July, and that's the number we will use next spring when we create the 2025-2026 budget. And with that, well, we're in 15 minutes, not bad. With that, I would like to, unless anyone up here has anything they'd like to add, I would like to begin our extended or expanded town hall style Q&A session. Jessica has a microphone. I will ask that anyone who would like to ask a question, simply identify yourself. We don't need your home address or anything like that. I would ask that you keep your not going to put a time limit or anything. I would like to ask that you phrase whatever it is you have to say in the form of a question. If there are statements or monologues or soliloquies, maybe we can find another time for that. But for now, if you have a question, again, about anything village related that we talked about or did not talk about, please ask, and let's have some good back and forth.
And for folks online, if you would like to ask, please just raise a hand.
Sure, why not? Cynthia.
My name is Cynthia Menino, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was fantastic. And I really like the direction everything is going in. I have a question about in my neighborhood, with the housing. I'm glad to see the affordable housing come in, but I know some of my neighbors were worried about, the environmental impact with runoff. So I know that it was addressed, but is there the question that I hear, and I don't know the answer to, is there some kind of mechanism in place that if there is a problem, that the village will be able to go back and make sure that it's addressed? And not fall on the cost of the village. It would be, I guess, INHS. I don't know who would take care of that.
Yeah, well, that's a multi-part answer. Ben may have more color to add on that. The answer is yes. I mean, the site plan review approval has a recourse portion to it. So it not only requires that the construction of any project that is subject to site plan review is actually done in accordance with what was approved. There's also a go back to the developer piece to it that says, well, this either wasn't done correctly or this is problematic and needs to be fixed. INHS, they actually recently hired a new executive director. I'll actually be meeting with her next week. She's very responsive, and historically, my understanding is that the projects they own and operate, and we've actually seen this on the improvement side, on the positive side with Compass, the projects they own and operate are run fairly well or very well. And so my hope is that will be the case here. And so the short answer to your question is the recourse would be if there's an issue to go back to them directly and say, this is not functioning the way it was designed, and what can you do to fix it?
Hi, my name is Susan Rack. I am wondering if, first of all, just definition of terms, short-term rentals, does that include Airbnbs?
Yeah, it would
Yes.
be anything, usually 30 days or less.
Great. Is a speed sign being considered for the corner between the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church, and the library? We have a lot of children that cross there daily, and that corner, I've seen some near misses.
So interestingly enough, in the lovely state in which we live, speed limit signs are not allowed to be closer together than some predetermined amount. And I forget what that number is. If it's 250 feet or 500 feet, but there is some, and God only knows how these things get written into law. But Chief Nelson and I have had this conversation specifically about Halsey Street, interestingly enough, where you're not allowed to have speed limit signs too close together. So on Main Street in particular, because it's a state road, state DOT would have to install the signs, and they are installed at, my understanding is that they are installed at minimum distance already. So I don't know that we would be able to add another one there. Could possibly move, well, if we move one, we'd have to move them all, and DOT would have to do it. So we can put that on, Dusty's right behind you. He can add it to the list of things that we have interesting conversations with DOT about.
I will note that the New York State DOT contact that I have has been much more acceptable to communication. I think he's new within the last year, and every time I've called him, he answers the phone and communicates, whereas in the previous 10 years, we never had any contact.
Great.
So,
Well, that means we haven't ticked him off yet, so let's not start now.
I believe we're also purchasing new crosswalk buddies, which are like those little like
Things that people hit all the time.
yeah, you know, the it's better that they hit those than actual children. So it's like the plastic. I think it's gonna be in a more durable material that holds a little flag that's in the crosswalk. Unfortunately, those are not great in the winter when you have to plow and maintain roads. But we are investing in more of those to help draw attention to the crosswalks.
Okay, now speed limit signs are one thing. Does that include temporary signs that tell people their speed? As they go
We
by?
have what, two
The
now?
mobile one.
Yeah,
Yeah, the mobile ones.
Oh, so Keith was actually not referring to the buddies in the middle of the road. He was,
When I first gave my update, when I said we're investing in speed signs, that's what we're buying more of, that tell you how fast you're going. Either it flashes lights at you or it tells you you're awesome. So we're trying to make more people be awesome in the community. Possibly, yeah, they're mobiles. We can put them wherever we think there are trouble areas.
yeah, Dave.
Dave Breeden. One quick question, maybe for you, maybe for Ben. Where are the rapid charging stations going?
That is such a good question that I should have included that initially. So they will be in the village parking lot and at the farmer's market.
So follow-up question, if I may.
Yeah.
I live on Main Street and park in the municipal lot most of the winter because that's where it's legal.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that people could park that badly. It's as if the cars were dropped from above by somebody who was blind. I'm wondering if it would be possible to get lines painted to guide people's parking. And I know we don't own the lot. Maybe we need to ask a priest, but it would be great if we could help guide people's parking in that lot.
So that's something that I think we're already talking about. Ben and Dusty are thinking sort of along those lines as well, separately. Certainly for the chargers, that will be part of what happens, right? Would be painting lines and some signage that goes along with that. But as a separate issue, I don't know, Ben, do you have anything to say specifically? I know they're in conversation about exactly that.
We're in conversation because Dave asked it. So
Yeah,
keep
agreed.
asking the question, Dave, and we'll eventually figure that out.
We have a couple of hands up online. So let's have Amelia has a question.
Hi, I'm trying. Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hold on.
Is that too loud?
That was a little loud.
Doggies, stop. Okay. So my question is, the sewer line from the home to the sewer main. You mentioned that I think under DPW service to sewer. The sewer line that I have is like clay, and roots. They can't screw on, so that's like a bell and a. So basically, roots get in every 3 feet, and I'm wondering if the DPW can do something about that, or if that's completely my responsibility.
I'll let Dusty take a swing at that.
The DPW only owns sewer mains, so residents own from the home all the way to the connection at the main. We do not own any private sewer lines.
Okay, and how do I know where those lines extend to? I don't know where the main is.
You live on Main Street, correct?
Correct.
It runs behind your house. The sewer mains on Main Street run back lots, so it would come out the back of your house or possibly the side and run towards your backyard. The issue with clay service lines is we have no way to trace them, which is the problem with most sewer lines, as they are usually either clay or PVC. there's no way for us to trace them unless you have a plumber come in and try and snake them. And then there is a chance we can trace the metal snake that they would run through your service line.
Okay, one follow-up. How far down the hill, or is there a map where that I could look at where the main is?
We have a map for where the mains are
Where's that?
at my shop, or the GIS mapping system now, it would at least show you where the manhole covers are behind the properties, which might give you an estimation, but that's not public access right now. So your best bet is to get in touch with me or the clerk's office to get in touch with me, and we can show you the map to at least show you where the mains would be.
Okay, thank you.
And Dusty will be happy to schedule an appointment with you, Amelia, and try to figure out what's what.
Great. Dusty. Okay, thanks.
Let's see. Rick Darfler, I believe, was next.
Getting there. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Let me preface all this. I'm amazed by how much the village has done and how much it does for the residents here. And, but that said, if there's one more thing I can put on your plate, with respect to the assessments, and I realize it's not under the village purview to have much to do with the assessments. But I wondered if there was some way that someone on the village board, someone with financial and real estate pieces in their toolbox, not mentioning any names, would get together with Annie Corman and perhaps have a talk with Jay Franklin about how the assessments in the village of Trumansburg are put together. Because at this point, if all of the assessments in the village of Trumansburg are rising at a level that's so much quicker than the ones in the rest of the county, we're doing heavy lifting as far as county taxes, Trumansburg taxes, even town taxes. I trust implicitly the village is managing the finances, and everybody is rising at a fairly normalized level in the village itself. However, if the village is rising at 25 or 30%, my assessment went up 30% this year. We're doing some heavy lifting for the county as well as the other municipalities. And I just wondered if there was a conversation that could be had with the assessor to try and get them to understand that perhaps a lot of what raises our assessment is not some kind of implicit, it's more of a greater theory, greater fool theory than there is some kind of reason why our houses are going up. The biggest reason being, I think, that there's so little for sale that people are having bidding wars. 5 or 6 years ago, when we bought the property we're on, the property had been on the market for 500 days. There was no bidding war for it, but now it seems that most properties, bidding wars for it because there's so few properties that are on the market. And I don't think that it's fair that the village of Trumansburg has an increased burden compared to the rest of the county. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Rick. I am having those conversations already. I actually emailed Jay Franklin the other day. So this is a multi-part answer, and it's not going to make anyone feel any better. But it is what it is, and it's where we stand. So the countywide assessments that will take effect in July, the countywide assessments increased by 19.6-ish%. Village of Trumansburg wide assessments increased by a little over 15%. So the initial answer that we will undoubtedly get back as part of that conversation is that we are not above the county average. We're actually slightly below the county average. That's number one. Number two, I've been spot checking assessments as people have mentioned it to me, as I get fiery texts from folks. We had an unfortunate incident at the town hall earlier this week with a very angry town resident. Understanding, of course, I hope folks understand, of course, that the village and the town don't establish your assessments at all. It is strictly a county function. But I've been spot checking assessments, and again, this won't make anyone feel better unless you're planning to sell soon. None of them are out of line with current market rates. That is a function of the fact that we live in a desirable part of the Finger Lakes. And it is, frankly, a function of the fact that we haven't built any housing inventory in about 2 decades. 1 or 2 homes added to the Larchmont Avenue area, Larchmont, Tamarack area. The last one, I think, was built about 10 years ago. So, you know, not to belabor conversations that we've had over the last couple of years with respect to zoning and whatnot, but it does at the end of the day become a strictly supply and demand issue. If we live in a high demand, good area to live in, desirable area, and there's nothing for sale, then prices will go up. And there's certainly nothing county assessment is going to be able to do about that. But your point is well taken, Rick. If there is a way to soften the rate of increase or spread it out over time, that would certainly help with the pocketbook for our residents. So those conversations are being had, and they will continue to be had. 1 second, Bruce. Looks like we have Yana Hexter online with a question. Yana, can you hear me? Just need you to unmute.
All right, I did it. There we go. Sorry.
No problem.
I'm unmuting on my phone. I'm in a car. I'm not driving, but I'm not used to that. Yeah, I'm curious if you could expand a little bit about the plans for Camp Barton. And first of all, thank you so much for preserving Camp Barton for us. It's such a beautiful place, and this is one of those actions of your life that will continue for hundreds of years. And well, thank you and the others involved. So thank you for doing that. But I'm curious. You said you know, you're thinking of a 4 or 5 year, I think you said 4 or 6 year kind of timeline of getting it on board. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what you're thinking or what the plans are or what that might look like. And of course, I'm sure you don't know everything, but roughly what you're expecting.
Sure. I'd certainly be happy to go into more detail with you directly if I don't answer any of your questions. But the overview is that the municipalities of the Village of Trumansburg, Town of Covert, and Town of Ulysses formed what's known as a local development corporation. A local development corporation is a odd carve out of New York State corporations law that allows municipalities to collaborate. It doesn't have to be municipalities, but municipalities tend to be the ones that use it. And it creates a third-party, not-for-profit entity operated and run by members, and the municipalities are those members. I am the current chair of that newly formed LDC. We have 2 representatives from each of the 3 municipalities on our board of directors. And currently, it's funded with dollars from each municipality, but because it's a not-for-profit, we have fundraising capacity where municipalities do not. So that's the big advantage. Village of Trumansburg can't go out and seek donations for anything, but the LDC can. So we refer to it as, the name of it is the Three Falls Local Development Corporation. There are 3 small falls on the Camp Barton property. So the Three Falls LDC will be the licensee, licensed to operate the state park once New York State owns it. It is a full-fledged state park. It'll have a name. I believe the governor is going to pick the name. We don't get a say in that either, although we've sent various recommendations Frontenac Point, by the way, is off the list. We can't use the name Frontenac because of the original Mr. Frontenac's unfortunate history and past with native population. So whatever the park's name eventually becomes will be something hopefully very nice and very non-controversial. And the Three Falls LDC will be the licensee who operates it. Complicating things a little bit for 2024 is that the town of Covert received grant money to replace the bridge that's at the bottom of Frontenac Road in the middle of the property. So the bridge will be out for some significant period of time. The bridge at the bottom of Cemetery Road took about 6 months to complete, so I would guess it's probably in that neighborhood. But the town of Covert in Seneca County is hopefully going to be able to pave South Frontenac Road, which is currently a seasonal use road. They're planning to pave it and make it a full regular town road with use and accessibility to the park. So with all of that going on, I think programming in 2024 probably looks like some type of property maintenance, open during daylight hours to the public. I don't know that we'll be able to charge for admission yet. That may be something we can put into place in the summer of 24. It may not. And then as we move forward over the next few years, we have in mind initially, although it's not planned out yet, to be able to host events, much like North Point at Taganic. We'll be able to rent pavilion, rent space. The Boy Scouts will also be leasing space on their, I think it's a dozen or so weekends a year. It'll remain open to the public anytime someone leases the use of some space, just as it does at Taganic. And then over, let's say, the next 3 years, we would like to move into watercraft use operations. Swimming is one we've talked about, but that means hiring lifeguards. I'm not quite sure what that'll look like. So first things first is getting to closing, getting the license agreement signed simultaneous with closing. And then we will have to look at hiring a park manager, whether that's part-time or full-time. We'll be looking for that initial chief executive hire for the to-be-determined state park. And then we'll be able to ramp into operations over the next several years. The devil is in the details, as always. And, we're going to take on as much as we can, as quickly as we can, but we don't want to take on more than we can handle before we have the appropriate staffing and, frankly, funds to support it. If there's additional questions you have, Yana, don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So I'm sure it was helpful for others. Can somebody who is hosting, can they mute me if they can?
We muted you.
I think you're good. All right, Bruce has a question.
Yeah, I'm Bruce Babcock. I live at 33 East Main Street, and my house is the old Treeman Mill property. And I originally purchased the property under all the Ed Sage property. It now does not exist. I would like one question asked. When people build parking lots, destroy your property, why is it they are not required to have a permit? And why am I not notified? And all the property destruction is done while I'm gone and my daughters. And I've watched the construction crews literally pack up and leave as I'm unloading my backpack in the house. That's how fast they move. I would like to know why this village is allowing people to build parking lots on my property, destroying my land, and no permit. No permit. Where are the zoning laws? And where is that zoning board of appeals guy, Tim Hamilton? When I approached him once on this, he told me, Bruce, if you don't like it here, why don't you move? I'm not kidding. That was what's said. I want to know why there's no permits required for these people that are destroying my property. I want to know that.
Thank you, Bruce. Other questions?
Joel Podcameter. Thanks for the food. Pretty nice. Rorden, if we went back to the budget, dry as it may be, the last column, was that a tax levy percentage change? Yeah, that's,
Yes. I believe that's, yes, the last column is
Yeah.
growth in the levy. Yes.
so, I look at 2020, maybe 2022, 2023, right in there. Why was the change in tenths of percent? And I'd just like to know about that. Historically, or what took place where there was such a little change?
Yeah. Anywhere, so functionally, anywhere you see a large change. So between 1920 and 2021, from 37,000 to 73,000, I'm sorry, that's, yeah. Anywhere you see a larger change in the levy is payroll related. Anywhere you see less change is either because of a very large jump in assessments, which would not be the case in 21, 22, and 22, 23, or because payroll, which means staffing, remained flat. I hate to make it sound like I'm beating up on EMS. You know how much I love our EMS department and what I feel about its importance to the region. But anywhere you see large payroll changes, it's EMS related. Almost entirely. There's a couple of things thrown in. Health insurance increases were higher this year. They went up 8% instead of 5%, which of course affects payroll. State retirement. Now we're getting out into the weeds. Albany tells us as the employer contributor to state retirement what our functional increase needs to be based on where the New York State Retirement Fund balance is. And so if they need more money, they'll levy it to the municipalities as this is what you contribute next year. Frankly, if the market is good and the state retirement fund looks good, they'll say, okay, you don't need to contribute quite as much next year. And so that's part of it, since everything is functionally a function of payroll. And the two moving pieces to that are state retirement contributions and health insurance. But where you see bigger jumps, it is mostly due to a change in staffing or payroll.
Hi, Norm Hummel. I just have a question. If you get secure the funding for the Fire EMS Center, where would it be located?
We have a I want to be careful how much I say because nothing's in writing. We have had conversations. We have had positive conversations with INHS about the property formerly owned by Aubles. They currently, at least as of today, don't have any specific plans for the vacant land pieces. My pitch to them, which has not been rejected, so that's why I say it's a positive sign, is that those of you who've been here long enough to remember the pig farm, that spot would make an ideal location for a large fire and EMS facility. That obviously will have a price tag attached to it. But as I say, those overtures have not been rejected, so I take that positively. But we can't really move forward any more concretely without a lot of money. I am, unfortunately, and it's the first time I've mentioned it publicly, but I think unfortunately we are going to have to take a much closer look at Plan B, which was our original Plan A 7-8 years ago, and figure out what we can do with this footprint and what that cost might be if it becomes really our only option.
This is not going to apply to anybody else probably, but I'm getting older. And as I do, I appreciate the EMS more and more. My family gets a little larger too. So we really care. And we really appreciate what it already does. It's amazing. And the same compliment on everything else except, you know what I think about zoning. But Jack's not here. Thank you for bringing that up so I can complain about other things. My general comment on efforts to support tourism in the area is, really? Tourism is pretty stressful on the area. I think Jack would agree. Okay, so the big thing I'm concerned about is EMS, the fire station, all these kinds of things right now. I made a bunch of questions. And the big question I have is, what is the plan? I think a lot more information should be made public. I understand there are difficulties in real estate. You don't want to get too much public before it should be and all those kinds of things. But if $3.5 million was obtained, there was a grant application. What's the grant application look like? You know, can't that be a public document on the website? Be great to see that and see, you know, what's there. I think it's very important that the public information be as good as it seems everybody here intends that it should be, because, you know, we just heard about the previous fire station that seemed like such a good idea, and the public said, no way. So we don't want to go through all of this and end up on no way again. So we've got to bring the public along in this process. Roden, I really appreciate your presentation about how EMS works and some of the rules, particularly the rule the state says, if you get a call, you have to go. So, you know, that's really just sort of takes the roof off everything. You know, how do you control something that doesn't have a boundary in that space? That's really, really difficult. Short of that, I'd say what it amounts to is that the village is running what is equivalent to a business. And we've got 3.5 million that might come in. That number tells us a good hint. If that's the seed money, what's the real money? And what's the risk that goes with that? Sure, we can get bonds with low interest rates to pay it down over some time, but that shows up on the tax levy. It won't be the whole amount. So if it's a business, then what the business is that insurance companies and other municipalities that buy into the EMS service will offset all of this real money, the money above the seed money. Well, we sure hope so, but it seems like an awful lot of risk to all of us. You know, there are only 600 and some households here. We're a pretty small place. So I have these concerns about that. Can't do much about the aging, I guess. Thank you.
I'll actually comment on a couple of those things. Appreciate it, Don. These are the kinds of things, not very much keeps me awake at night, honestly, but if there was something village related that keeps me awake at night, this is the one, and Ben Carver and I have talked about this for years. It's a big problem. And it's part of my conversations, my ongoing conversations with our representatives in Albany and DC to a certain extent, but primarily Albany. And unfortunately, and this is where you all can be helpful in the future, should you ever have the opportunity, Assemblymember Kellis gets it. And I would say maybe I could come up with a dozen names of elected officials in Albany who get it. The rest of them don't. They have no idea what's happening on the ground at home. They assume, depending on which side of the aisle they sit on, that it's either something that can be taken care of entirely by the private sector, or they assume that the counties can handle whatever the need might be. Both of them are wrong. And one of the ironic joys of being a political independent is I get to tell both sides that they're wrong. But unfortunately, that means there's probably little help coming So the real answer to the bigger question is, and Joel and I have talked about this, if we were redesigning a regional EMS system from scratch and it wouldn't look like what we have today, what would it look like? And we may end up in the next decade or so, and it won't be me solving that problem, but if we get to a solution over the next 15 to 20 years, it's probably some type of a regional consortium style agency where we have, and not to get off on a tangent, we all have things that trigger us, right? I had a conversation with Reed years ago about this, and he was a knee jerk, well, privatize it kind of guy. And I'm a private sector person, by profession, but there are some things that can't be done by the private sector. Private sector needs to make money in order for something to survive. If you live rurally, there are not enough calls for that private agency to make money. So some things are better done by local government or some collaboration between local government and not-for-profits. And I think maybe we're seeing a potential future blueprint with what's happening at Camp Barton. Maybe it's a public-private partnership of some kind where the, quote, private entity is a not-for-profit and the public side owns the park. Maybe there's a version of that we can work with others to create on the EMS side of things. Unfortunately, that's going to take time. It's going to take a hell of a lot of cooperation on the part of a lot of municipalities and a lot of elected officials and a lot of folks who probably don't understand the problem very well. But that's where I think if this Tompkins County Rapid Medical Response Program can be the genesis for a larger conversation, then maybe we can get to a good solution at some point in the future. As for the spend, the $3.5 million was not an application. It was a congressional appropriation. So I basically said, hey, Mark, we'd really like money for a fire hall. And he said, well, I've been a volunteer firefighter since I was 16. I think that's great. I'll put it in. So that was very, very friendly and pleasant of him, but it has to survive the congressional budget cycle. And it has to make it into whatever final version of the bill eventually maybe gets signed by someone, right? So yes, if $3.5 million showed up today, we'd be about halfway and we would have 3 years to use it. So then we would have to go back to Anna again, say, is there any more state money? That's unfortunately, that's the process. And it's not one that is nothing, as you all know, the most cynical comments that anyone can have about the way government operates in DC and Albany, they barely scratch the surface. You can be as cynical as you want and not really even come close to how dysfunctional it can be, but it's the system we have. And so, it would come to hat in hand begging for more money. If we would get to a place where our engineers estimate 8 million, and I can say, sharpen your pencils and get it to 6.5. If we could get to 5 in grants, I think I can sell to all of you borrowing the remaining 1.5. If we have to borrow 6, that's just not going to happen. And so that's why, a plan B for this building, I think, is important.
Well, we could start with bake sales.
Not if I'm baking.
Okay, I was mentioned that the firefighters have to pay for their own training. Is there any program or way that the village can help? Because maybe if we can help with the training, maybe we can get more firefighters volunteering. I don't know, but that's, yeah.
Yeah, to clarify what that means, the individual volunteer is not paying. The individual volunteer, Dolores, is not paying for their training out of their pocket. What we mean is that the fire company as an organization, through their fundraising efforts, is able to pay for most. We have in our budget a training line, which is what the village contributes, and the municipalities that we contract with, what they contribute. But we're able to keep that number low because of the fire company's efforts in their own fundraising to pay for their training. The individual volunteers are not coming out of pocket to take training.
Okay, one more question. What's it called? The ARAP, yeah, ARPA, thank you. So the village, I think, got money for that. And how much and what did we use it for?
We got about 174,000 and change in 2 tranches, so $87,000 a year for 2 years. There was a calculation allowed with the ARP, so American Recovery Something Act. The language of it allowed for municipalities who received funds to do one of 2 things. You could either allocate it to specific projects, or you could use what was called a revenue loss recovery calculation. And it was a relatively complex calculation. We had our auditing firm in Cerro do the calculation for us that said you would take, I believe it was the 18 months leading up to a date that Department of Treasury set in mid-2020. So basically the 18 months prior to X point in the pandemic. And what was your revenue, meaning tax revenue? But it actually was all sources of revenue. But for most municipalities, primarily that's taxes. And then the Department of Treasury had a calculation adjuster that said, based on what your revenue was for the 18 months prior to this date, you should have received X in the 18 months after. If you didn't receive that, that part was called loss. If the ARPA money received was equal to or less than that loss amount, you could simply say, we're recouping our loss with those dollars and put it in the general fund for our operations. If the ARPA money received was greater than the calculated loss, you had to allocate it some other way. So your large municipalities like Tompkins County, their ARPA money received was much greater than any calculated loss, so they had to allocate it to certain uses. For the village of Trumansburg, our calculated, I don't have the number in front of me, but the calculated loss was something in the $240,000 to $250,000 range. So the ARPA funds received was 187. So we used the revenue loss method, added it to our general fund balance, and we use it for ongoing operations.
Hi, I'm Ariana Blossom. This is just a quick appreciation. Right before Christmas, my son, who's 8 years old, he wrote a letter to Santa asking for a Star Wars lightsaber. So we dropped it off in the mailbox. And then at Christmas, he got a box with 3 lightsabers that you flick them and they extend, they light up, and they make sound. So on Christmas Day, we had an epic lightsaber battle with the grandparents, the parents, and the 8-year-old. So I just want to say thank you.
Debbie Watkins. I have been aware of the work that Tompkins County police departments have been doing. They've been putting the hub together. The last time I saw an example of it, Trumansburg was not included in the statistics. Is there a plan to make sure that they get included?
Yes, so Chief Nelson has been collaborating with that group. I think he is still in the process of providing certain data points. I think he has expressed some concern over disclosing some of that data. A lot of it comes down to the fact that larger agencies, one of his biggest concerns is a lot of those other agencies are staffed around the clock, and we're not. And he is very nervous about disclosing how many officers we have on duty and when they're on duty, because he feels that would make us vulnerable to have that data public. So it would show kind of precisely when we're not on duty, and your closest police car could be 20, 30 miles away at any given time. So I know he has been hesitant because we're so small to share some of that information. And so I think he's continuing to kind of work with them on what makes sense for us to share. But I think it's a little bit of a one size fits all approach that we don't fit great into. And some of it's resource intensive too as well. I don't think we have the capability to capture everything as readily considering we have such a small department who's doing a lot of different duties. But I know those conversations are ongoing, and he's been engaged with that group since its inception. And Bert, I don't know if you have anything else to.
Nothing specific other than that I support Chief Nelson managing this process the way he has been. I think Keith's comment about it being one size fits all is good. We like and desire transparency and disclosure over a whole host of things, but when it comes down to the practical, sometimes, you know, if it's a community of, let's say, 40,000 people that has 16,000 calls a year, such as the city of Ithaca, knowing when certain arrests and crimes occur doesn't really mean anything to the person looking through the data. In a community of 1,800, you will know who was arrested and where they live and what the story was if you see too many specifics. And in that level of detail does infringe on folks' privacy. Chief is concerned about that. Yeah, Chief Nelson, I don't want to speak for him or put words in his mouth, but he is a believer in innocence until guilt is proven. So he wants to be sensitive to those things that, frankly, don't rise to the surface in a large community or in a city, but will be very apparent in a small one. And then, yes, staffing, because we are not a 24/7 police agency. And there is only one sheriff's deputy on this side of the lake at any given time if they're not on a call. It would be problematic for us to be sharing any type of real-time or delayed statistics on when officers are on duty at any given time. So to be, stay tuned for how that plays out.
I have a different, it's just a statement. Ben Darfler, excellent. I just saw the fruition of at least 10 years ago, the GIS stuff, and then Dusty gets kudos for that as well. What some people may not realize is that a lot of our grants and things are besides a lot of requirements for basic for the grant that you're going in, required us to have systems like GIS. They require information systems to be more robust than we've seen. So there has been some excellent progress in this board towards those ends that will get us more money as well. So thank you.
Looks like Tom had his hand up first there in the back.
Tom Myers. This will be a quickie. I think Ben Darfler can answer it. You have any updates on taking care of T-Berg?
It's a quickie. I don't know if that's a quickie.
Oh.
I guess what I'll say is, so folks who may not be familiar, there's a wonderful volunteer group taking care of T-Berg that does a number of things around the village regarding flowers and plantings, grooming. There's the flower boxes on Main Street, maintenance of some of the areas in front of the village hall, and I think some other areas around the village. I'm not quite sure about all the different places. Recently, the village and taking care of T-Berg have been kind of working more and more in hand, in a way that the village is taking on more financial ownership of materials and helping with the boxes and plantings and so forth from a material standpoint, taking that as a village responsibility, since we get so much wonderful support of those ways that we're improving the village through those flower boxes and so forth. And the village is kind of continuing to work in that way. So we're purchasing a watering cart to assist in the watering of all those planter boxes. And the volunteers will continue to donate their volunteer time to the village to actually plant and put these boxes out. The DPW also helps with placing the boxes, pulling them out at the end of the year. So there's a really wonderful collaboration of the village being able to step in and make sure there's the financial backing to work with all those, kind of support the program, and the volunteers can donate their time to the village to make that really work together. So I'm very excited. I think it's a really wonderful addition and kind of growth of that program that the village is able to support. So I don't know, Tom, if you had any specific questions about it, but that's kind of my spiel.
And Ben, if I may add, and you may have said, but the assistance of the local business owners who care for the
Yes.
watering has been a big contribution, keeping them flourishing through the season.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good point as well. And the village, right? So not all of the boxes, but many of the boxes are kind of adopted by local business owners. You'll see that there are now signs in many of the boxes that state that. That's a really wonderful addition to the program. And the business owners feel a lot of pride and enjoyment in helping out with that. And then the volunteers can kind of take care of the other boxes around the village that don't have that adoption.
We have a hand raised online. We're going to get to Jerry. Go ahead.
Good morning, Jerry Krause. My audio is okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if my mic was even hooked up. Good morning. Appreciate all of the work and accomplishments of the village and the report today. I love our EMS and DPW and the fact that we're trying to manage with financial responsible ways. But one of the things that I didn't get much of today was progress on our comp plan goals. And I guess I'm looking for more information along those lines. That's not going to be today, apparently. But the written goals and strategies and actions are written in a way in our comp plan that aren't really measurable. So I'm just kind of trying to understand the progress we're making toward those ends. Just to give you an example, I mean, there are goals on environmental, there are goals on affordable housing, both to rent and to own. Under the environment, we're looking to identify sensitive areas, educate people on natural protection. And we amended, and we're talked about amending the conservation overlay district, and we have amended the zoning residential laws already, with the purpose of increasing affordable housing and such. I'm just wondering where we stand on priorities on some of our goals. Environmentally, we've given, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 variances to the zoning law with the conservation overlay districts. And I'm not sure if we're going to be, continuing to give those sorts of variances to the law. Is the law something we want to follow, and is it still valid? Do some of these goals need to be modified or changed at this point? I think in some cases, even with the short-term rental, we've sort of we're at least holding off on it, if not abandoned some of these goals. So I guess I'm looking to see where we stand on making progress toward those things. So, for example, on affordable housing, we loosened up our zoning laws so we can increase density in the village. And Gordon, based on some things you said in the past, if we don't increase density, we're going to lose our EMS in 8 years. I want to know kind of where we are, since we're almost to the halfway mark on that. And then I guess the other part of that is, in the past, it's been stated that because of the police reform efforts going on in Ithaca and Tompkins County, we're going to lose our EMS because they were being impacted by that. I want to know if that's still a valid theory, or if we've realized that it's a lot more complicated than that, and need to do some other things to save our EMS. And I'm not sure that zoning changes are going to fix that either, but I'm trying to figure out how we're doing on our goals. So that's what I've got. Thanks.
Yeah. As much as I appreciate a turn of phrase as much as the next person, and I've been guilty of putting words in other people's mouths from time to time, it's important for me to clarify that never once did I say that if we didn't increase housing density, we would lose our EMS. And never once did I say that we were in danger of losing EMS because of either housing or the situation with law enforcement in Tompkins County. What I have said, and what remains the case, is that the cost of providing EMS goes up at a rate much higher than everything else. And no one, Jerry, understands the complexity of our EMS network better than I do. And the fact is that all of these things are deeply intertwined. What I did say last year was that we are rapidly on pace to have a median household value in the village of Trumansburg of $500,000 by 2030. And I will publicly state that I was wrong about the date. I overshot the date by probably 3 or 4 years, as everyone who opened their assessments this week probably learned. We're on path for a $500,000 median value in the village of Trumansburg sometime in the next couple of years. And that is simply a function of an unwillingness or an inability, it's not pointing fingers, to increase our housing stock very much in an area where people want to live. And so it's the ultimate catch-22 in upstate New York, really. You know, do you want to live somewhere where people want to live and the services are good, but there's not enough supply to meet that demand, so things get more expensive? Or do we want to live somewhere, as is the case in many parts of upstate New York, where maybe the services aren't as good, maybe the values aren't as good? That's the catch-22, and I believe we're on the best side of that. If it's either or, we're on the better side of that coin. The EMS piece is a regional piece. It is something that the county needs to engage in more, and they've begun, thankfully. It is something that our counterparts in other municipalities need to continue to engage in. It's something that other counties, frankly, need to engage in, and the state needs to become involved. We as a community are dedicated to maintaining our EMS department, as is evidenced by increased staffing, increased budgets, increased spending. We're on our way to having a second full-time staff probably at some point in the next 5 or 6 years. Joel has done a great job of being able to slowly and incrementally grow that. The fly car piece that Ben discussed is an important part. Now, we don't need a second full-time staff all the time, but we have the capacity to have it some of the time. Those things are all things that need to be managed going forward. I don't know if you have anything to add specifically on the comp plan piece.
I'll just say briefly on the comp plan piece, I see us making heavy use of the goals through the entire comp plan and CPZR work. I was just recently talking with some of the members of the Green Committee as well to look at the comp plan, what the goals are there and how that can work into what they're thinking about with the new green scene or green team, green space evaluation. So I think it is very much a living guiding document. I do think, you know, with all of these, you do need to find checkpoints to kind of go back and reflect and check in on your goals. And so I do think that's something I could see the CPZR committee taking on in the next few years once we hit maybe that 5-ish year mark with the comprehensive plan. Take a look at where we think we've done well, where we think we want to adjust potentially, where we think we want to invest more. So I do see us really making good use of that comprehensive plan. I do think, to your point, there is, to Jerry's point, the goals are lofty and not not meticulous in their measurement. There's not we need to get exactly 5 new houses by some date. And so to that end, there is room for interpretation and understand that's kind of the point of what a comprehensive plan brings. But it does bring us an opportunity to look back at what we were trying to aim for and ask ourselves those questions. And I think that's something we'll want to continue to do at kind of checkpoints along the way. And then, when people talk about a comprehensive plan every 10 years, I think is give or take the time to go back and do a little bit of a deeper dive into it. So there's a process here where we continue to reflect back, look at what's in the comprehensive plan and see where we're stacking up against that and if we need to make adjustments. So that work will continue to go as we move forward with this comprehensive plan. But it is guiding and driving quite a bit of what happens in the day-to-day, the month-to-month work of the village.
And I'll actually just add one other thing, and I appreciate Jerry reminding me of this because I haven't discussed it publicly in a while. Most of you will recall a couple of years ago, I publicly and privately was quite critical of what was occurring in the city of Ithaca with respect to law enforcement and some of the strains that it was putting on adjacent agencies, both law enforcement and EMS in particular. And I am pleased to say, and it's only fair that I not only speak when things are going poorly, but when they're going well. I am pleased to say that that situation has turned a corner dramatically in the city of Ithaca. Particularly thankful to some of the senior members of Common Council who've been there for some time, Duxon Wynn being one, and Mayor Cantelmo, their efforts to kind of right the ship after honestly about a decade of poor relations between City Hall and their police department has led to, I've had recent conversations with some senior leadership at IPD. The environment has improved, staffing is improving, they're able to recruit and hire. They just signed the richest collective bargaining agreement in Ithaca City history with their police department. So all of the efforts around police reform and transparency and having a better visibility into how law enforcement operates, those are all positives. But the desire on the part of city administration for about a decade to essentially wind down or attempt to do away with their police department, that has ended. And so, thank you to the current leadership in the city of Ithaca for seeing the need for those departments. It has alleviated a lot of pressure on other law enforcement agencies who are still available if there are staffing shortages in the city to help, but they're not responding multiple times a day like they were a few years ago. It's much less frequent, and it has had a follow-on effect to some of the reasons why our EMS was responding into the city as frequently as they were. That's all separate from the fact that the EMS system is still an intertwined network that relies on each other. But the strain for that particular reason to our departments has certainly seen a turn for the better. So thanks for reminding me of that, Jerry.
I just want to note quickly, we've talked a little bit about the comp plan and vis-a-vis zoning. The comp plan addresses every part of what we've done. So I think this whole presentation, I think maybe it would be a little too on the nose to kind of read down the comp plan and talk through each of these initiatives that we're doing. But, for me, I'm working on recreation. There's very important action plans within the comp plan. So I think all of this really does tie in. I think maybe we didn't make those ties as explicit as we could have, but just to sort of put a bug in everyone's ear that maybe next year that would be a fun way to frame this meeting, right? Is to think of everything specifically in those terms. So I think that's a great idea. Maybe, we'll put a note for next year to do it that way. I think that's great.
It's a great idea. And, it's too early to pat ourselves on the back, but what Yana mentioned earlier, saving Camp Barton might go down as one of the greatest accomplishments in regional history, at least in this part of the Finger Lakes. It was 100 years to the year that Taganic Park was purchased from the then Boy Scouts. Or it was purchased from folks who owned it, who let the Boy Scouts use it, to correct that. So 100 years to the year from that occurring, New York State Parks is purchasing a piece of property from the Boy Scouts directly. So I think from an environmental protection standpoint, where most of Cayuga Lake shoreline is in private hands, I think that's pretty significant.
Yeah, the question is, can we get four-way stops on all the intersections on the north side of the village? Nothing against the south side. You probably need them as desperately as we do. But on the north side, it would really work. For years, I have thought that it would just make a lot of noise with cars stopping and starting all through the night. There aren't any cars all through the night. There's only those few cars. During the daytime, we have 6 to 10. You can download an app onto your cell phone and check for yourself, which I do. I have a tripod on my porch. I put this up there. At the end of the day, I can tell you what the speed was of every car that went by. 6 to 10 of them will be above 30 miles per hour. A few of them will be above 40. And at nighttime, we get 50s. This is grossly inefficient for the police to try to handle. They've been good about it. There's been a patrol sitting down in the church parking lot every once in a while watching the street, but the cars are really infrequent. An officer could sit there for 2 hours and not see one of these. So it's, just not the way to do it. But a stop sign on every corner would just be really efficient. It would also make a really handy way for the police to enforce. They could sit almost anywhere and watch the intersection over there and see if somebody's sliding through it. So I think it's something to look at. I really would like to see it done. Thank you.
A chicken in every pot and a stop sign on every corner. What do you
Yeah,
think, Keith?
I would just say, you know, one, maybe we just deputize you, Don, to, if you're already recording speeds, well, we just give you a little badge and let you chase those cars down. I can't speak to the practicality of installing more stop signs. It's certainly something we can discuss, or your next police commissioner can discuss. I don't know if I'll be able to do it in the next 30 days. But I do know there was a time in this village when a lot of more tickets were written and not everyone enjoyed such firm enforcement. So I will just say, certainly we want the village streets to be safe, but I do think there is a balance. You know, trying to get everyone that rolls through a stop sign may or may not go well. You did say this is a business, so if we want to increase our revenue a little bit, but I guess we don't really get a lot of that revenue. So, but definitely something we can look into.
Other questions? We're having fun. Ask away.
Just a quick one. Does NYSEG provide any funding on the tree thing? There isn't anybody at NYSEG. When they cleared out all, you know, they did a bunch of work. Who paid for that?
So NYSEG's tree maintenance regime is proprietary, I guess I would say. They don't like to give you details because then you would immediately have a basis for critique. NYSEG does what they want when they want. They own, and this, you know, statutorily, they're basically gifted a right of way around all of their wires. They have sole discretion when it comes to maintenance of those wires and the trees around them. So we do. And I will say, so Dusty has interacted, I think, with NYSEG and with particularly the NYSEG tree contractors. We also can reach out to, you know, they have a government relations department. There are sort of leverage points with varying degrees of effectiveness, but underwriting all of that, like the basic fact is they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. That's one of the reasons we're getting rate increases, right? Because they essentially didn't do any of their tree maintenance for 10 years and now they're catching up.
Right.
Absolutely.
The tree stuff that was done in larger quantities last year, that was mandated through NYSEG they were trimming mainly the main lines. As far as tree maintenance throughout the village with the street tree company or street tree commission and whatnot, we have a contact with the NYSEG, the local group. And if we have a tree that we feel is an issue with wires, they will come and assist. If it doesn't appear, and they come and they'll look at it and they say, sorry, we can't, this isn't going to take out any of our lines. There's nothing we can do to help, whether it's the homeowner or us. They won't. But if we can prove or say, hey, look, this tree's leaning really bad, and if it does come down, it'll take out wires. They're pretty good about helping us out on their dime.
When they're in town. I mean, that's
correct.
Important.
Right? There's only one group, and I don't know how large an area they cover, but it's pretty substantial, I believe.
We have Amelia has her hand raised again. Amelia?
Hi. So this is another sort of self-serving question, but I think a lot of people on Main Street might have the same question or same complaint. Coming into my driveway with my car, I hit bottom almost every single time. And I've learned in 23 years how to enter my driveway by going at a 45-degree angle so that one wheel goes up and that lifts the carriage up, and then I don't. But I still hit bottom frequently. And one year I put tar out into the road in order to make it possible to enter my driveway without hitting bottom. And it's because of the shape of the road. The road is, you know, circular, convex. Yeah. So, and it's, you know, clearly that's so that the water will run to the gutters and get out of the way. But is there any way to, and when I called, someone said, oh, that's not our problem, that's somebody else's problem. Is there any way to get either the road redone on the edges, or to allow me to put the tar out into the road? The reason I'm asking is because, you know, every winter the tar gets plowed away. So I don't know. This is a really bizarre question, but every one of my neighbors hits bottom when they when they come into their driveway. And I actually had a car lose 2 of its 3 mounting bolts for the engine because of this problem.
So that's a good question. It is a common problem, and we're neighbors, so I'm aware of the issue. Unfortunately, the best answer I have is that state DOT is planning to repave Route 96 sometime in the next few years. I think they mentioned 2026, which is not tomorrow, unfortunately. But we are extremely limited with what we can do in the state road. In fact, we're not supposed to do anything in the state road. So it's something that you might be able to talk with Dusty about with respect to, is there anything that can be done with the grading on the sidewalk part? I mean, we can look at it, but the best I can recommend, Amelia, is talk to the guys, see what can be done, and understand that we essentially have no ability to act on the state road outside of an emergency.
I'll add it to my list of ongoing conversation with the state around that part, that repaving. I don't know if they will listen or do anything about it, but I have a list and we are talking to them. So now it's on it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, Amelia isn't the only one that's having problems. I mean, Route 227 is a really hard place to come in and out of and not hit bottom of the car. I mean, you can go 5 miles an hour or less and still scrape. So so Amelia is not the only one. 227 is also a big one.
Yeah, we'll add that state road to our list of DOT bullet points.
Back to the comp plan. I haven't read it recently, but isn't there something in there about a recreation center, a senior center? Some, and what has been done and what's been addressed around that?
So I think there's a
ev-
lot of references. Was that
Go
there's a lot of references and discussion of recreation in general, as well as sort of other cultural programming. I think that the actions are a little bit more vague than, you know, build a community center, right? For those of you who have lived here for decades, say, I don't think there's been a time when we were not actively or semi-actively discussing how to build a community center or a recreation center or something along those lines. I think for us, as far as the specific actions, the actions are sort of more like explore possibilities, continue to fund things like the library, continue to fund the youth programs that I mentioned. As far as actual community center, I'll hopefully someone else knows more than I do, but I think that's where I come down, my experience of the comp plan action items anyway.
Yeah, there are no plans for a community center at this time. If you want to push Keith right over the edge, get him started talking about this. I believe that the village and the town took to heart the lesson that was learned with the referendum this fall on the potential purchase of recreation land. Lip service to recreation needs does not equal a willingness on the part of the residents to actually do something about it, is what I learned. And I know that there are folks who said, well, it was the location. I frankly find that to be completely disingenuous, given that the location was in fact perfect next to a campground, walking distance from a state park. And it would have been funded entirely with federal dollars. And I had an argument with a friend who said, well, those are our tax dollars. And my answer is, no, actually, they're not. Federal government runs a deficit, which means they're printing money. And if you look at how federal income taxes are distributed, we are a net, rural areas are net consumers of tax dollars relative to major metropolitan areas. So we would actually have been spending other people's money. And I'm a big fan of spending other people's money on public projects. So that was very disappointing, and not to revisit that nightmare, but my sense is that the community is not necessarily as supportive of recreational projects, to include things like community centers, as maybe we had hoped. And a comp plan is something that is aspirational. So people can say, yeah, we should have a rec center. But when it comes time to actually spend dollars to advance those causes, we find out whether they're really willing or not. And so that's a long-winded way of saying there are no plans for a rec center. And if we put together plans for a rec center at some point that makes sense, we'll have to see if it survives a referendum, if a referendum is needed.
I completely agree with you. The one thing that I truly appreciate looking in retrospect is that we think ahead. Given the just several examples, the veracity of the windstorms that we've had in the last 2 years, if Ben, more than 5 years ago, hadn't started the tree committee, we would have been in a far worse place in the last 2 years trying to clean up the mess after every one of these storms.
Just as a note, the tree committee, to my knowledge, was originally started 25 years ago, and it lapsed briefly.
Yeah.
And then we restarted it. So I don't even know who owns the credit for that original version. Roden dug up a tree inventory from. Yeah. So the credit can be shared, is what I'm saying.
One other point that I remember specifically was how much the water mains were the main water pipes were going to cost us. I believe that when I was on the board, it was only going to cost us $40 million for those 12. And now you're saying 80 million. So being short-sighted is not being cost effective. That's my only statement. And we will need a place, some place where the community can get together. Are we going to have village hall meetings at Saganaw? Or it seems like there is no place that can accommodate what we would like to see as community events. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, Ruth.
Well, is this on? Okay. The senior citizens have quite an active group. Have you tried to call us?
I'm talking about having.
Oh, you're not a senior citizen. That's fine. Well, when we have the Legion, and if we don't keep that Legion going, it's a community hall now. It's advertised. Yeah, Legion and Community Hall. So it's something that the veterans just aren't joining up anymore. So that's something we got to keep a hold of. And we do meet, now it's only once a month, but it's great. Everybody sees people that they know, their age and older. By the way, I live on a 4-stop street. And that's a lot of cars stopping and starting. And a lot of them flying through. Yeah. So I don't know if there's any answers to anything, but we live with what we live with.
Ms. Ruth, if I could ask a question of you. So does that mean anybody listening who wants to get involved and from a senior citizen standpoint could come to a meeting once a month? Where? At the Legion. Do you have a date fixed? Is it like a fourth Thursday? How could, maybe I'll find out and people can inquire. It's second and fourth Wednesdays of the month provided. Okay,
Maybe you should check and get a date.
I'll get a date and I'll put it on the website. Thank you.
I'll give the Legion a plug. We just held a youth sports casino night there and we thought it was fantastic. Yes, it was a beneficial night for both the cause and the Legion itself. And so we thank the Legion. It was a great place to hold the event. And so if you're planning an event locally, that's one place to consider. I also you mentioned the stop sign. So just real quick regarding speed, I didn't want to sound like I was dismissal of the speed issue because it does come up a lot. And that's why we're putting up those automated speed signs in strategic places. But Don clearly has recognized certain speeds at certain times. If there is reoccurring speeders and you notice it's a consistent time of day, that's information you can share with us and we can try to use that to our advantage. The other thing I would say, when we have apprehended repeat speeders, I don't want to stereotype. It's not unusual that it's a local teenager. So one way you can help mitigate speeding issues in your neighborhood is speak to your neighbors and tell them to have their kids drive cautiously. That can go a long way. Yes, we have certain corridors within the village, especially between 227 going to the school, coming down Halsey to South DeWitt. I think Don, you once described your street as the Pizza Express. Yes, the Pizza Express to New York Pizzeria to get their pizza. So okay.
Good to know.
Thanks for the tip, Don. Let's see. Rick online has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Rick.
How are you?
Good.
So I just wanted to, I didn't know that we were going to hear more about the speeding thing. So I just wanted to, go back to and reinforce some of the things that Dawn said. I think, maybe four-way stops on every intersection would be overkill and create, its own little set of problems. But I do think, there is a serious speeding problem on multiple streets in the village. And everyone knows that, right? So I really do think that it is important that the village takes seriously this issue and look hard at traffic calming measures that could be taken, particularly on the main thoroughfares that people use as shortcuts and for other things to move through the village at a high rate of speed. And it's not just teenagers. Some of the worst offenders on my street, Congress Street, are local contractors and also contractors who are coming in from other areas to work on site in the village. So, and I see this, all the time. And I just, it seems like a lot of times when this point is raised, it's really poo-pooed. I'd like to see, a serious effort by the village to look at, calming measures that could improve the safety and would also save law enforcement resources too, which I know are strapped. That's my thought.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly not poo-pooed. It's a constant conversation that is going on with the chief. I know he fields emails and calls about it pretty consistently. What's difficult is enforcement, to your point, Rick. We usually only have one car on duty at any given time. So we hear emails, we hear conversations, and when those take place, we send a car to that area and we monitor. And it might happen that nothing happens that day. That's just kind of how speeding goes. But it's certainly when we get complaints, when residents have noticed speeding on their street, the chief is usually pretty quick to monitor that area. Again, that's why we're also investing in the speed detectors, because if we put those on a road, we do find that they slow people down. So if there's a street in your neighborhood that you're seeing this happens consistently, we can talk about deploying one of those there and seeing if that helps. The other thing I would say that I hear from chief often, and this is not to dismiss concerns, it's just a point to raise, is, I mean, maybe outside of Don's smartphone, which apparently is recording speeds now, the average person is not well trained in knowing what speeding looks like to the naked eye. So what may look like someone going really fast on a village side street may not necessarily be speed. It very well could be. But that is a point he raises and he talks to folks about, I know. But all that to be said, if you think that it's happening constantly on your road, again, please notify, email the chief, call the village, and somebody will start to monitor that location.
Could I just quickly respond to that? Because that wasn't my point. I don't know, maybe I wasn't clear. I've contacted the chief, I'm sure others have, as you suggest, and people, make these complaints, but using law enforcement to try to, calm the way people drive through the village can only go so far. And I think we've given it plenty of time. I think looking at actual physical measures to calm traffic it's overdue. A serious look at it, and not one that sort of downplays the problem. I'm talking about traffic that is clearly exceeding the speed limit, which is 25 in the village, and that's not very fast. These are not close cases I'm talking about. These are, egregious speeders. It's not all the time. It's certainly at certain parts of the day. But what I'm asking for is, not more of the same, but, an actual serious look at the state of calming measures. There are many municipalities around in central New York that have instituted these kind of things. There are examples that could be looked at, and I'm suggesting that be done.
Yeah, question in the back.
Rob Aiken, we moved in just last fall. Delighted to be here in Trumansburg, love Central New York, moved in from Kansas. One of the things we enjoy is a Black Diamond Trail. And it goes to the creek, to Taganic, but the railroad extended further north. Is this on anybody's radar, an extension of the Black Diamond Trail?
It is. There's an active plan. We just had a meeting January, so it's not last month anymore. There's an active plan on the part of New York State Parks, because they own the Black Diamond Trail, to extend it to the village. What exactly that looks like is the planning phase that they're in. So New York State likes to do things in multi-year phases. So this next phase is actually two parts. One is extension of the Black Diamond Trail south from, and I might have my parks reversed, from Treman to Buttermilk, and then extending the Black Diamond Trail north and west from where it currently terminates Parks has acquired a piece of land. So what we know as that parking lot on Jacksonville Road that is kind of the mouth to some of the gorge trails, that's eventually going to go away. And there's going to be better parking established on Gorge Road itself. And then they would like to extend the Black Diamond Trail to the village. There are a couple of concepts as to how that could occur. There are some rights of way issues. There's the possibility, one idea that I kind of like is to follow the railroad trestle along Falls Road and then cut across the street to somehow incorporate Smith Woods, and then run that trail up to our new sidewalk near the SureSave. And then eventually I floated the idea that once New York State owns Camp Barton, the Black Diamond Trail should flow through the village and then down Seneca Road, down Frontenac, all the way down to Camp Barton. So those are actively in I'll call it the early design phase. If and when we get to that stage, I'll volunteer you.
Not to overly belabor the point about speeding up here on Bradley, because I live across the street from Don and Dolores. The times when I've noticed speeding being the worst is Sundays, because people are rushing to church. And there've been a few times when I've yelled at people. There was one person who went flying right by me when I was walking on the street. They didn't slow down. And so I went and I talked to the pastor and I said, you need to talk to your congregants, only to realize a little later, oh, I'm pretty sure it was the pastor. So I think there's something, I mean, recognizing I don't know the cost and what it takes to do all this, but like a speed bump somewhere on Bradley would at least encourage people to have to slow down. The other thing that happened when my husband and I were walking across the street right by the library, we were walking the crosswalk and somebody just, I don't know if she was looking at her phone or what, but she came pretty close to us because she just wasn't paying attention. And I think there's something, I've seen this happen down at the crosswalk by Gimme too, where there's a blind spot there. To your point, Keith, about having lights flashing, you know, like there are also the lights that can flash on the crosswalk. You can press the button so that people have to see something changing, because for whatever reason, a body in the street sometimes isn't enough. So I often wish we had some measures like that.
I'll let Rorden explain the response we got from the Department of Transportation with regards to the evaluation of our Main Street that they did. But just to follow up and kind of going back to Rick's point, we have considered other measures like speed bumps. And as soon as you said that, you should have seen Dusty's face behind you.
Yeah.
Because
So
we
hard to
have,
plow.
in my naivete, early on in my time on the board was like, well, we just need to put some speed bumps all over the village. And Dusty was, please, no.
No.
So what
Ruins my
the problem there is, obviously, when you're plowing, you destroy speed bumps. We looked at temporary speed bumps that can come out of the ground during the winter and go back in the ground. It just, you know, I think I took some flack online for this idea. One of many times. So it's just, excuse me. Speed bumps have never been popular. In the times at least that I've talked about them. But again, we can continue to look at, I mean, technology is always changing. I'm sure there's new things popping up all over the place that we can look at. You know, a lot of times it's going to come down to probably expense versus benefit. But as I've mentioned a few times, you know, I won't be in this position much longer, but I know it's something that's very much on the mind of the chief and continues to be. And please continue to bring ideas forward. And I'll make sure, you know, in my last month here that's something we really take a hard look at. Like, what are the devices out there, different mechanisms in which we can control speed without police cars just sitting by.
To go along with that, the speed bump thing is very inconvenient. But one of the things I've been reading about, learning about, and seeing down in Ithaca is raised intersections. It's a lot easier on the plows because it's paved into the road. Then you know it's marked, and there's a whole intersection that's raised up, and it allows it. There's a lot of it down in Ithaca that I've seen. And that's, again, the cost being the biggest thing of how much extra it costs to try and pave something like that and put in all the markings that need to go with it. But it's something I would much rather see over straight speed bumps.
And they do work. There's one down by GIAC and yeah. Bunch of them down there.
Dan Dan Brown. One thing in terms of speeding I've noticed is a lot of cars going over the speed limit have come in hot from the south. They, looking at Interlaken and other towns around, usually there's a longer 30-mile-per-hour speed limit before you hit the town itself. And we're in a situation where actually it's 45 where you cross back and forth to the fairgrounds and grassroots and stuff. If the state would allow pushing that 30-mile-an-hour thing maybe back a few hundred yards, then people would already hopefully, figured out by then that they're going a little hot into Trumansburg, and then you might get fewer people speeding on the first part of Main Street because they've, just had to go from 45 to 30 without much warning.
I know that has been discussed. I know, especially as Smart Start continues to expand their daycare operation there, they sit right in a 55 zone between the Village and Jacksonville. So there's been some thought to, well, why can't that whole stretch be at least 45, if not, slower? And again, I can let Rory speak to more of this. But kind of the general response we've received on a lot of these requests for safety and study of our Main Street and these other areas and evaluation is because you haven't had a disaster, everything seems fine. So as much, for the last 5 years, as much as we've tried to be proactive on a lot of this stuff, that's kind of been their angle is, you haven't suffered tragedy. So it doesn't look like you really have a problem.
Look how many years it took to get the caution sign down at 96 and Perry City Road. I think it took 3 or 4 fatal accidents before they ever even did anything. So it is kind of a relentless.
And I don't want to give the impression that these are not good suggestions. These are all good suggestions, and these are actually things that we are discussing. I know the town. So the 45-mile-an-hour zone used to start in front of McGuire, so they have gotten it pushed back to roughly where the old Barangas is. So that was one move, and it took the town of Ulysses about, I think, 6 years to get the state to approve that. I believe the town, I'll check with Supervisor Olson. I believe the town is looking at whether they can get the state to push the 45. Basically, you'd come through Jacksonville coming home, it would be 40, then would increase to 45 and stay 45 to the Village. I think the town is investigating that possibility. And we'll see. I know that when we talk about things on Main Street, whether it's speed limits, or we had them investigate the possibility of putting a flashing light at Union Street by the old Napa. The DOT's formal language, the formal response is casualty statistics do not justify this change at this time. So, I mean, and I get it. It's a big state with lots of roads, and they can only really look at numbers to make a determination. But if that's how the decisions are going to be made, then we will just have to continue to be the squeaky wheel. Yeah, Don.
Could we just take the Trumansburg Giant and lay it there in the intersection, take some photographs? That's a serious question.
As good a suggestion as any, Don. Other questions? Happy to answer more as we approach the noon hour.
I just want to make one little comment about the tourism thing. As a former business owner, there's nothing more that I would love to see that every blank window down on Main Street be filled, that we have a very vibrant Main Street. I owned a flower shop in Trumansburg for 9 years. And I will tell you that my main business was weddings. That's the only thing that kept me going, not my everyday walk-in. Because from when I started my business to when I closed my business, my walk-in traffic really diminished with the uptick of CSAs where people could go get their vegetables and their flowers, and Amish markets and that cut into my everyday flower business. So my big business was weddings. And the big attraction for weddings was the wine trail. And I can tell you that 90% of my business were people that did not even live here. The majority of them did not even live in the state of New York. So it's very important to our community, and it's very important to our business owners that we draw those people in. Like you said, love to see them come, love to see them go. But we really, really need to support that part of the tourism for our community, because it's the only way that our local business owners are going to thrive. You know, people overwhelmingly are supportive of our local businesses, but they're not supportive 12 months out of the year. And, you know, we need that extra, those business owners need that extra boost, and those restaurants need that extra boost when people from foreign countries are on a holiday and we're not, they're here. So, and I know that too from being a server for 8 or 9 years at restaurants locally too in town. So you really, really see the difference. And I think tourism should be encouraged. And like you said, you know, there's good with the bad, but we really, really need it in order to stay thriving.
Yeah, you know, you can't pick your parents, and municipalities can't pick their geography. So we can't. We're blessed by the good fortune of our geography, and tourism is part of that. Other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for attending online. Thank you to folks who attended and left. We have refreshments left over. Please take some on the way out, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks.